You've got blood on your hands, Pirro. Jasmine Crockett's voice thundered through Congress. 79 shell casings and 13,400 youth gun deaths were thrown in her opponent's face. In front of millions watching live, Jasmine unveiled secret DOJ files tying Jeanine Pirro to the gun lobby, and the chamber gasped. For 47 seconds, Pirro sat frozen, unable to speak, while the nation erupted online. What explosive truth could silence one of the loudest voices in a siren screamed through the humid Washington night, red and blue lights bouncing off the stone columns of the Capitol. Reporters shouted over one another, their voices trembling as they delivered the headline flashing across every American screen. Congressional intern gunned down, 79 shell casings found on D.C. streets. The nation was frozen in shock, parents clutched their children tighter, and across the country, millions whispered the same name with grief and fury: Eric Jackham. Eric had been just 21, a rising senior at UMass Amherst, interning on Capitol Hill with the hope of shaping the future. Instead, 4 bullets tore through his body on June 30th, ending his life in seconds. Police found the street littered like a battlefield to rifles, a 9mm, and enough rounds to start a war. His dreams of public service evaporated in the bloodstained pavement, leaving behind a grieving mother, a broken father, and a nation demanding justice. Inside the packed hearing room, tension pressed down like a suffocating weight. Families of victims clutched framed photographs, some weeping silently, others burning with rage. Camera lenses glared like watchful eyes, capturing every flicker of expression. Then the doors burst open. Jeanine Pirro stormed inside, heels striking like gunfire on marble, her jaw clenched, her eyes blazing with a cold conviction that made the air crackle. She didn't wait for introductions. She didn't offer condolences. She seized the microphone like a weapon and unleashed her verdict. Children with guns are monsters, no mercy, no excuses. Her voice echoed through the chamber, slicing through grief like a blade. Gasps erupted. Mothers clutched their photos tighter. Fathers muttered curses under their breath. A young woman in the gallery sobbed, "She's talking about my brother." And the cameras captured it all. Pirro pressed on, her voice growing sharper, deadlier. 17-year-olds spraying bullets. 16-year-olds firing rifles in the dark. These are not children. These are predators. And predators must be caged like adults. She slammed her hand down for emphasis, feeding the frenzy of her supporters. Some clapped, others booed, the chamber boiling with rage and fear. The networks cut to close-ups, a grieving mother's trembling hands, a father's tear-streaked face, Pirro's unflinching glare. Every angle told the same story: America was tearing itself apart over one brutal question. And in the second row, a woman sat still, her posture controlled, her eyes locked on Pirro with the steady fire of someone who had seen enough. Jasmine Crockett. She hadn't spoken yet, but the intensity in her gaze told viewers everything. A storm was brewing, one that would explode the moment she rose to her feet. Viewers at home could feel it. Something seismic was about to happen. Pirro smirked, confident, defiant, as though the hearing belonged to her alone. But Jasmine's silence was louder than thunder. The moderator's voice cut through the chaos, staring into the camera as millions leaned closer. Tonight, America must decide: is Jeanine Pirro right? Should minors be treated as cold-blooded killers? The question hung in the air like smoke before a firestorm, daring the nation to choose a side. The room still echoed with Pirro's declaration: children with guns are monsters. But even as her words lingered in the air like smoke, all eyes slowly shifted to the second row. There she was, silent, unmoving, a storm contained within flesh and bone. Jasmine Crockett's hands were folded, but her eyes burned with an anger so controlled it was more dangerous than Pirro's fury. The cameras found her, zooming in, capturing the moment before ignition, as though the nation itself was holding its breath. She rose slowly, deliberately, her chair scraping against the floor like the opening note of a symphony. The chamber stilled, whispers fading to silence. And then, with a voice steady as steel, Jasmine struck her first blow. Justice, without compassion, is not justice, it's vengeance. The words cut sharper than Pirro's roar, not because they were loud, but because they carried weight. A hush fell over the gallery. Parents leaned forward. Journalists scribbled frantically. Pirro's smirk faltered for the first time. Jasmine stepped closer to the microphone, her tone calm but loaded with fire. Eric Jackham was not a monster. He was 21 years old, a senior at UMass Amherst. Interning on Capitol Hill, he dreamed of serving this nation, and now his mother is here tonight because he came home in a coffin. At that, the cameras swung to the front row. Tamara Jackham, Eric's mother, clutched her son's photo to her chest, her shoulders trembling. The gallery gasped as her sob broke through the silence, a raw sound that stabbed through every living room watching live. Pirro shifted in her seat, but Jasmine pressed on, her voice gathering momentum. Madam Jackham is not alone. Behind me are families who have buried children because this city failed them. And every time you call their sons and daughters monsters, you bury them twice. The audience erupted with applause, muffled cries, and furious murmurs. Hope flickered for the first time since Pirro had poisoned the air with her words. From the side, Representative Jim Jordan leaned forward, his lips curling with anticipation, like a wolf preparing to pounce in Pirro's defense. The cameras caught him exchanging a look with her, nodding in silent alliance. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser sat stiffly, caught in the middle, knowing she would be forced to pick a side before the night was over. The tension in the chamber tightened, each second pulling the collision course closer. Jasmine's tone softened, her words now a blade wrapped in velvet. We can throw children into prisons and call it justice, but until we face the guns flooding these streets, we will bury more Erics. The question is not whether kids should be punished, the question is why do they have access to 79 bullets in the first place? Gasps tore through the gallery, the statistic exploding like a grenade. Pirro's jaw clenched, Jordan's eyes narrowed. The cameras panned back to Jasmine, who stood tall, calm, unflinching, a warrior cloaked in compassion and fire. The moderator glanced nervously between the women, his voice unsteady as he tried to regain control, but it was too late. The nation could feel it. Two storms had collided, and one would be left standing. The clash had only just begun. The air trembled as Jasmine's words settled, but Jeanine Pirro refused to yield. She leaned forward, eyes blazing, and spat into the microphone. You care more about criminals than victims. You defend the thugs with guns while families bury their children. Her voice cracked like a whip, the venom meant to break Jasmine's resolve. Gasps echoed, some cheers erupted from Pirro's supporters, and the chamber roared with overlapping voices. Jasmine didn't flinch. She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto Pirro with a calm so sharp it cut deeper than rage. Her response came low, steady, and devastating. No, I care about victims like Eric, victims abandoned by your failed system. The gallery fell silent. Tamara Jackham's sobs filled the void, raw and aching, her trembling hands holding Eric's photo high for the cameras. That image, one grieving mother against the weight of the system, flashed across every television. In America, Jasmine stepped toward the microphone, her voice climbing like a rising storm. This year alone, 13,400 young Americans have been killed by guns. 13,400, the highest number ever recorded. And yet, instead of asking why, instead of stopping the flood of bullets into our streets, you call our children monsters. That is not justice, it is cowardice. The screens inside the chamber flickered to life, charts and graphs filling the walls, red spikes of violence stabbing upward year after year until 2025 towered like a mountain of blood. The audience buzzed, leaning forward in disbelief. Some clapped, some shouted, the clash of grief and fury filling the air like thunder. Pirro's lips tightened, but she forced a smirk, firing back. Numbers don't lie, Crockett, and they prove exactly what I've said. More children are killing because they know there are no consequences. Treat them as adults and the killings will stop. Her words rang cold, echoing across the chamber. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her tone shifting from sorrow to steel. Do you dare stand here and pretend consequences don't exist? Tell that to the Jackham family. Tell that to the mothers who have buried their children. You call this justice, but all I see is a system protecting the people who profit from violence while leaving our streets drowning in blood. The chamber erupted again, shouts, claps, angry cries from both sides colliding like waves crashing against stone. For a brief moment, the camera zoomed in on Pirro's hands clenching, unclenching, betraying nerves she couldn't hide. Jasmine's calm contrasted like fire against ice, her pose electrifying the room. She paused, letting the silence tighten like a noose. Her voice dropped to a whisper that carried like thunder. And if we're going to talk about protecting families, Then maybe it's time America hears the truth about the cases you buried. Judge Pirro, the gun trafficking cases tied to your allies, the gallery gasped. Pirro's eyes widened, her body stiffening like a cornered animal. The chamber buzzed with shocked whispers. Journalists lunged forward in their seats, cameras zooming in for the kill. The nation held its breath. But what happens when Jasmine reveals evidence that Pirro herself buried cases of gun trafficking? The chamber still shook from Jasmine's accusation. The words "cases you bury" echoing like a gunshot no one could ignore. Pirro's face reddened, her chest heaving, but instead of retreating, she slammed her fist on the wooden desk so hard the microphone screeched. "Enough of your lies, Crockett," she thundered. "If we coddle these criminals, we bury more Erics, do you hear me? More blood, more funerals, more shattered families because of people like you, who excuse monsters as children." The chamber erupted in chaos, gasps and cries colliding with furious applause. Hardliners in the back rows shot to their feet, clapping furiously, shouting "That's right. No mercy." Their voices cut through the chamber like jagged glass. But in the front, Tamara Jackham clutched her son's photo tighter, tears streaking her face as she screamed back, "Eric wasn't killed by children, he was killed by guns." The contrast split the room in two, applause crashing against boos, grief colliding with rage, the nation's fracture exposed in real time. Pirro seized the moment, her voice soaring over the nose, each word laced with venom. 14, 15, 16, 17 age doesn't matter when you're pointing a rifle at innocent lives. These predators know the law shields them, they exploit it, and blood runs down our streets because of it. That ends today. She jabbed her finger toward the gallery, her eyes blazing. Congress must act. Treat these killers as adults in federal trials or admit you're complicit in every death that follows. The camera zoomed in close, catching every drop of sweat on her forehead, every flicker of rage in her glare. On the scrolling chyron, the networks framed her words in bold. Pirro, treat juveniles as adults or bury more victims. Social media feeds exploded, half the country cheering her toughness, the other half recoiling in horror. Jasmine stood motionless, her silence deliberate, eyes locked on Pirro like a predator waiting for its prey to overextend. The camera cut between them, Pirro pounding the desk, spitting fire. Jasmine posed like a storm gathering strength. The tension was unbearable, like a boxing match where one fighter had thrown her heaviest punch but the other hadn't moved. Pirro leaned forward again, her voice dropping lower, colder. "I've buried enough victims in my courtroom to know this. Sympathy won't save lives, punishment will. And if Congress won't deliver it, then shame on this body for letting more children die." Her words dripped with finality, daring anyone to challenge her. The chamber was a battlefield of sound cheers, boos, sobs, the banging of the gavel trying in vain to restore order. Viewers across America leaned closer to their screens, their pulses racing, fear hung in the air, Pirro's fire swallowing the moment whole. But beneath it, another current ran strong, an anticipation that Jasmine Crockett had not yet spoken her full truth, and when she did, the world knew it would shake the nation to its core. The echo of Pirro's fists still rattled through the chamber. When Jasmine finally moved, she rose with a deliberate calm, her eyes never leaving Pirro's, and in her hands, she held a thick folder stamped with the seal of the Department of Justice. The gallery fell into a hush, the kind of silence that prickled the skin, as though everyone could sense the fuse about to be lit. Jasmine stepped forward, her voice low at first but trembling with contained fire. "You want to talk about predators? Then let's talk about who gives them the weapons." She opened the folder and began pulling out pages, slamming them on. Pirro's smile faltered, her jaw tightening as she hissed, "That's a lie." But Jasmine cut her off, her voice booming now, echoing through every corner of the hall. "You call kids monsters, but who arms the monsters? Not their mothers, not their teachers, your friends with deep pockets. While families buried their children, you buried the cases that could have stopped the flow of guns." The chamber exploded, half the audience erupting in applause, the other half shouting in fury, the collision of hope and outrage creating an electric storm. The moderator's gavel banged in vain, his voice drowned out by the uproar. Tamara Jackham clutched her son's picture and cried out, "Tell them, Jasmine, tell them the truth." Her words pierced through the chaos, raw and desperate, amplifying Jasmine's tower. The camera lingered on her trembling hands, Ben Swan. Back to Jasmine, who now towered at the microphone like a general leading an army. Jasmine raised the stack of documents above her head, shaking them for the cameras. This isn't conjecture. These are DOJ records, signed, sealed, and buried under political pressure. You scream for punishment while protecting the very pipelines that flood our streets with bullets. And you dare to stand here and preach justice. The audience gasped again, this time with a collective shiver of realization. Viewers at home leaned forward, their screens alive with hashtags. Hashtag Pirro exposed. Hashtag justice for Eric. Hashtag who arms the monsters. Pirro tried to interrupt, shouting over the nose, her face twisted with rage. This is political theater. But Jasmine's hand slammed down on the desk, silencing the room once more. No, Judge, this is the truth you hoped would never see daylight. Her words dripped with conviction, each syllable striking like a hammer. The emotional tide turned sharply fear, and anger transformed into admiration and defiance. The crowd roared, some chanting Jasmine's name, others pounding the benches. Pirro sat rigid, her face pale beneath the harsh lights, a predator suddenly cornered. And across America, millions watching live knew the balance had shifted. The chamber buzzed like a hive, anticipation rising. If Jasmine had just revealed the buried cases, what else was she hiding up her sleeve? What evidence could she possibly unveil next that might not just wound Pirro but destroy her? The papers on the desk seemed to glow under the chamber lights, each stamped page carrying the weight of buried truth. The chamber was still buzzing from Pirro's 47 seconds of silence when the clerk called the next witness. A frail figure stood, clutching a worn photograph against her chest. The crowd hushed instantly. Every camera turned, lenses zooming in on trembling hands, tear-stained cheeks, and the face of a mother broken by tragedy. Tamara Jackham, the mother of Eric, the intern whose death had dragged the entire nation into this moment. She walked slowly toward the microphone, her knees unsteady, the photo of Eric pressed so tight against her heart that her fingers shook. The gallery leaned forward, holding their breath. Her voice cracked, but it carried across the marble walls with the weight of 1,000 funerals. My son dreamed of serving this country. He wanted to build something better. He worked late nights, he studied hard, and he believed in this capital. Now, her voice faltered, a sob breaking loose as she gripped the podium. Now I am burying him. The chamber erupted in muffled sobs and gasps. Even hardened reporters lowered their eyes, unable to keep writing. Jasmine Crockett rose from her seat and gently placed a hand on Tamara's shoulder, whispering something the microphones couldn't catch, but the gesture said everything. Compassion, solidarity, defiance in the face of cruelty. The cameras zoomed in, broadcasting to millions a portrait of grief comforted by courage. But the moment shattered when Pirro leaned forward, her voice sharp as broken glass. And countless more mothers will bury their children if we don't punish these young thugs. The words dropped like poison into the room. Gasps turned to outrage, and cries of sympathy ignited into furious shouts. A woman in the gallery screamed back, "How dare you call my son a thug?" Others booed, the nose swelling like a storm. Tamara's knees buckled under the weight of Pirro's cruelty, and Jasmine caught her before she could fall. Jasmine's face hardened, her voice trembling with rage as she shot back across the chamber. "How dare you speak that way to a grieving mother? Her son was a victim, not a thug." The crowd roared, chants of justice for Eric, shaking the chamber. The sound was deafening, as if grief itself had transformed into fury. Pirro's face was stone, cold and unyielding, but her eyes flickered with unease as the chants grew louder, echoing into the corridors outside, where protesters pounded on the Capitol doors. To broadcast split screens on one side, Tamara crying in Jasmine's arms. On the other, Pirro sitting rigid, defiant, isolated in her cruelty. The moderator slammed the gavel again and again, his voice nearly drowned. But nothing could silence the storm now. Sympathy had turned to anger, grief had turned to fire, and America was no longer just watching, they were choosing sides. Jasmine tightened her grip on Tamara's hand, lifting her arm high like a banner of defiance. The cameras captured it, the image destined to dominate front pages by morning. A grieving mother and a fearless lawmaker standing shoulder to shoulder against the face of indifference. The chamber thundered with no's, and the nation leaned in. What would happen when Jasmine finally unleashed the next truth she had been holding back? The echoes of Tamara Jackam's sobs still clung to the chamber like smoke after a fire when Jasmine Crockett stepped back to the microphone. Her hand lingered on Tamara's shoulder for one last second. Then she faced the chamber head-on, her eyes blazing with a fury held too long. The crowd hushed again, the silence vibrating with expectation, and Jasmine's voice thundered through the air like a strike of lightning. 79 shell casings on the street, 13,400 youth dead this year alone. That's not justice, it's genocide of a generation. The words struck like blows. Gasps ricocheted across the gallery, reporters looked up from their notes in shock, and even the moderator's gavel froze midair. Jasmine's hand slammed against the desk, the echo cracking through the silence like another gunshot. 79 casings, she roared again, her voice trembling with fury. Each one a bullet tearing not just through flesh, but through a family, a future, a dream. She turned toward Pirro, her eyes sharp enough to cut steel. And yet, you dare call our children monsters. But let me tell you the truth. Your war isn't on crime, it's on children who look like me. Children with brown skin, children from poor neighborhoods, children who never had a lobbyist in their corner. The words exploded like dynamite. Some spectators gasped in outrage, others leapt to their feet, clapping, shouting Jasmine's name, their voices clashing with boos and jeers from Pirro's supporters. The chamber had become a battleground, and the lines were drawn in blood. Pirro leaned forward, her lips twisting, but Jasmine didn't give her the chance to speak. She pressed forward, voice rising higher, faster, unstoppable now. You bury cases tied to your donors while burying children in graves. You shield the men who flood our streets with guns, then point your finger at kids who never had a chance. Don't you dare lecture us about justice while your hands drip with money soaked in blood. The crowd roared, the chants of justice for Eric, rattling the chamber walls, so loud they could be heard outside where protesters shook the Capitol gates. The cameras cut to split screens, Pirro's face rigid, jaw trembling, beads of sweat breaking across her forehead, while Jasmine stood tall, her silhouette blazing like a torch in the storm. The networks replayed Jasmine's words in live captions. Genocide of a generation, and your war is on children who look like me. Social media feeds exploded. Hashtags erupting in fire. Hashtag Jasmine Thunder. Hashtag Justice for Eric. Hashtag Pirro Exposed. For a heartbeat, the sound was unbearable. Cheers, boos, chants, sobs, a symphony of chaos. Then Jasmine lifted her hand and the room quieted, as though even fury itself bowed before her. Her final words in that moment landed like judgment. America, you must decide. Will we keep calling children monsters while protecting the real predators, or will we finally say enough? The crowd erupted once more, the noise like rolling thunder crashing against the Capitol walls. Pirro's face stiffened, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. And as Jasmine stood in the blaze of lights, unshaken, unstoppable, the nation leaned closer, hearts pounding, waiting to see what explosion would come next. The thunder of chants still shook the chamber when suddenly, another voice sliced through the chaos. Jim Jordan shot up from his chair, veins bulging, his finger stabbing the air like a dagger. This is a circus, Crockett's turning tragedy into politics. His shout boomed across the room, feeding the frenzy like gasoline on fire. The crowd split, boos clashed with cheers, reporters scrambled to catch every word, and the gavel hammered helplessly against the storm. Jasmine swiveled, eyes narrowing, her body pivoting like a predator who had just spotted prey. She didn't shout back immediately. She let the silence stretch, let Jordan's accusation hang in the air until the chamber leaned in. Then her voice cut like a blade. No, Congressman, politics is when you take NRA checks and look away while kids die. The chamber gasped in unison. Some clapped, others jeered. The sound of chairs banging against the floor filled the air as both sides tried to drown the other out. Jordan's face flushed crimson. He slammed his hand against the table, barking, "How dare you accuse me of?" But Jasmine raised her hand, silencing him with nothing but presence. "How dare I? Congressman, the numbers are public. The NRA poured millions into your campaigns. And every time a bill came to stop the flood of weapons, you voted no. That's not leadership, it's complicity." The gallery erupted again, louder this time, the chants of shame, shame, rattling the marble walls. Pirro tried to jump in, her voice sharp, but it was drowned out by the chorus of outrage. Protesters outside could be heard pounding on the doors, their chants seeping into the chamber like thunder rolling in from a storm. Cameras flashed, capturing Jordan's scowl, Pirro's tight jaw, and Jasmine standing in the eye of the chaos, unflinching, her voice calm but charged with electricity. Jasmine turned her gaze back to Jordan, her tone dripping with venomous precision. "You call this a circus? No, Congressman. A circus is when politicians perform for their donors, while families perform funerals for their children. A circus is when leaders sell their souls for blood money." The chamber exploded, chants colliding with boos, fists pounding against desks, the gavel slamming over and over but powerless against the storm. Jordan lunged forward as though ready to shout again, but Jasmine leaned into the microphone, her voice cutting clean through the chaos. "If you think I'm playing politics, then explain why the very cases that could have stopped the guns were buried under Pirro's watch." Her words landed like dynamite, the chamber jolting with a fresh wave of gasps. Reporters leapt to their feet, cameras zoomed in, and Pirro's eyes flickered with panic. Jordan lunged forward as though ready to shout again, but Jasmine leaned into the microphone, her voice cutting clean through the chaos. "If you think I'm playing politics, then explain why the very cases that could have stopped the guns were buried under Pirro's watch." Her words landed like dynamite, the chamber jolting with a fresh wave of gasps. Reporters leapt to their feet, cameras zoomed in, and Pirro's eyes flickered with panic. For a heartbeat, the nose dimmed as everyone tried to process what they had just heard. Jasmine didn't flinch, her hand resting on the stack of DOJ files, her other hand gripping a small USB drive glinting under the lights. The crowd sensed that something bigger was coming, something no one in that chamber could stop. What happens when Jasmine drops a video bombshell that ties Pirro directly to gun lobby corruption? The chamber's uproar reached a fever-pitched chant and boos crashing like waves against marble walls when Jasmine Crockett slowly raised her hand. The motion alone silenced the room, all eyes locked onto her as she lifted a small black USB drive, its metallic glint catching the light like a blade. Her voice, low and measured, sliced through the chaos. "You want to call this a circus? Fine. But the real show is about to begin." She walked to the screen at the center of the chamber, every step echoing with deliberate menace. Reporters craned forward, cameras zoomed in, capturing the tension of a nation holding its breath. Jasmine slid the drive into the console, the lights dimmed, and suddenly the screen flickered to life with grainy footage. A lavish ballroom filled, a framed chandeliers glowing, glasses clinking, the laughter of power and privilege humming beneath the surface. And there she was, Jeanine Pirro, holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by men in tailored suits. Her voice rang clear over the speakers, her laughter unmistakable. "Without the gun lobby, we'd have no campaign money, none. They keep us alive, and in return, we keep them untouchable." The chamber froze, gasps exploded like a bomb. Journalists' jaws dropped, pens slipping from their fingers. Families in the gallery covered their mouths, stunned into silence. For a moment, even the cameras seemed to hesitate, as though the lens itself couldn't believe what it was capturing. Pirro shot up, her face drained of color, her voice shrill as she screamed, "That video is out of context. It means nothing." But her words rang hollow, drowned beneath the weight of what had just been shown. The crowd erupted, some shouting in fury, others chanting Jasmine's name, their voices rising like thunder. Protesters outside pounded harder on the Capitol doors, their chants of justice for Eric, rattling the very foundation of the building. Jasmine didn't blink. She let the footage loop again, Pirro's laughter filling the chamber like a haunting chorus. "Without the gun lobby, we'd have no campaign money." Again and again, the confession echoed, each repetition driving the knife deeper. The camera zoomed in on Pirro, sweat glistening on her forehead, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of her desk like a drowning woman clinging to wreckage. Then Jasmine turned, her voice thundering over the nose. "This is the woman calling our children monsters. This is the woman demanding to put kids in adult prisons while laughing about the lobbyists who flood our streets with guns. She doesn't fight for victims. She fights for profit." The chamber detonated. Boos and cheers clashed, chairs banged against the floor, the gavel slammed so hard it cracked. CNN's Chiron screamed in red. Pirro caught on tape ties to gun lobby. Social media ignited instantly. Hashtags flooding timelines. Hashtag Pirro on tape. Hashtag gun lobby queen. Hashtag Jasmine exposes. Pirro tried again, her voice cracking. It was a joke, but no one was laughing. The footage spoke louder than her denial, louder than the gavel, louder than the chaos. Jasmine Crockett stood in the center, lit by the glow of the damning video, unshaken, unstoppable, while the woman who had called children monsters drowned in her own words. The damage was irreversible. The question now was no longer whether Pirro could survive this scandal but what other secrets Jasmine had yet to unleash. Reporters huddled, their phones lighting up with alerts as Twitter exploded in real time. Hashtags surged across every screen. Hashtag Pirro cover-up. Hashtag justice for Eric. Hashtag gun lobby queen. Clips of the leaked footage spread like wildfire. The image of Pirro laughing with a champagne glass replayed millions of times within minutes. Across the nation, protests sparked spontaneously, crowds gathering in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, scandals in some hands, clenched fists in others. Inside, Jasmine Crockett stood in the center of the chaos, her face illuminated by the glow of phones and cameras. She raised her hand and the chamber fell quiet, the silence breaking only with the muffled roar from outside. Her voice, clear and sharp, cut through like a blade. The gun lobby paid you in dollars. Judge Pirro, Eric paid with his blood. The words detonated, a line so searing it would be replayed on every news broadcast, carved into the memory of a nation. The gallery erupted, families of victims crying out in support, lawmakers pounding their desks, some shouting in outrage, others cheering until their voices broke. The sound was chaos, but the emotion was singular, righteous fury boiling over into something bigger than politics. Pirro's face contorted, her lips trembling as she tried to form words, but the crowd drowned her out. The camera cut to Tamara Jackham in the front row, clutching her son's photo high above her head, her tear-streaked face lit with both pain and defiance. The sight electrified the chamber, turning grief into a rallying cry. The chants inside joined the chants outside, merging into one deafening voice. Justice for Eric! Justice for Eric! The building shook, the gavel cracked, and America leaned closer to their screens, unable to look away. Pirro tried to shout over the noise, her voice shrill. This is mob rule. This is manipulation. But the cameras captured her panic, her denial crushed beneath the tidal wave of fury. CNN's Chiron glared in red. Crowds surround Capitol. Justice for Eric movement explodes. MSNBC ran the line on repeat. The gun lobby paid you in dollars. Eric paid with his blood. On Twitter, memes and graphics erupted. Jasmine's words emblazoned against images of Eric's smiling face and Pirro's frozen expression. Jasmine's voice rose one final time above the chaos, her tone steady, unwavering. This is not mob rule. This is the voice of America, and it is louder than your donors, louder than your excuses, louder than your lies. The chamber thundered with approval, the sound blending with the chants outside into a single unstoppable force. Hope surged like fire through grief, lighting up the night beyond the Capitol steps. Pirro's power was crumbling, and the nation knew it. The only question left was how far Jasmine was willing to go and what truths she might still unleash to finish the fight. The chants of justice for Eric still shook the chamber when Jeanine Pirro finally snapped. She slammed both fists onto the desk, her voice rising in a shriek that cut through the nose like shattered glass. This is a witch hunt. You're a disgrace, Crockett. A disgrace to this chamber and to this country. Her face burned crimson, sweat streaking under the harsh lights, her composure unraveling in front of millions. The gallery gasped, some booing, others laughing bitterly at her desperation. Reporters scribbled furiously, their headlines writing themselves. Pirro explodes under fire. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every twitch of her jaw, every tremor in her hands as she pointed across the chamber at Jasmine, her rage boiling into hysteria. Jasmine didn't flinch. She stood tall, her voice calm but edged with steel, slicing through Pirro's tantrum. If fighting for children makes me a disgrace, then I'll wear it proudly. Because disgrace is better than silence, and silence is what killed Eric. The chamber erupted, cheers crashing against Pirro's shrill denials, the sound of hope and fury colliding like thunder. Pirro's voice cracked as she tried to shout above the storm. You think you're a hero, you're nothing but a fraud. You're using a beau's death to advance your own power. Her words were meant as daggers, but they landed like whimpers against Jasmine's unshakable presence. Jasmine stepped closer to the microphone, her eyes locked on Pirro's unraveling form. No, Judge. Power is taking NRA money and calling it justice. Power is burying cases to protect donors. What I'm doing is what you should have done long ago, standing for the people who can't stand for themselves. The audience erupted again, the sound deafening, as though the chamber itself had chosen its side. Pirro's face twisted, her hands shaking as she slammed the desk once more. Lies, all of it lies. She screamed, but her voice faltered, breaking on the word, betraying weakness. The cameras caught at the crack in the armor, the moment when rage could no longer mask fear. CNN cut to a split screen. Jasmine, steady and resolute. Pirro, red-faced and unraveling. The gavel pounded uselessly as the chamber spiraled into chaos. Applause, boos, shouts, chants from outside merging with the storm within. Reporters shouted into their microphones. Pirro peers cornered, her credibility collapsing in real time. Hashtag spiked higher. Hashtag Pirro meltdown. Hashtag Jasmine unstoppable. Jasmine raised her hand once more, and the room quieted as if compelled. Her final words in that moment cut deeper than any scream. History will not remember your excuses, Judge Pirro. It will remember your silence, your corruption, and the blood you chose to ignore. The chamber went still, every ear straining, every eye fixed on Pirro as she sank back into her seat, her fury reduced to trembling denial. The cameras zoomed tighter, capturing her hollow stare, the sweat glistening on her forehead, the cracks spreading across her once impenetrable facade. Can Pirro survive this collapse, or has Jasmine destroyed her career in one strike? The chamber was still quaking from Pirro's collapse when the ripples spread outward, reaching every corner of the nation like an earthquake aftershock. On Capitol Hill, progressive lawmakers rushed to Jasmine's side, their voices fierce and unyielding. She spoke truth to power, one senator declared to a swarm of cameras. Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend Eric, she defended every American family living under the shadow of gun violence. Youth activists flooded the steps outside Congress, holding candles, chanting Jasmine's name, lifting Eric's face on banners that glowed in the night. The image was seared into millions of screens, Jasmine standing tall, not alone but surrounded by a movement. But as allies gathered, enemies circled with equal speed. Conservative media lit up like a battlefield. Fox anchors sneering into the camera. This was nothing but political theater. Jeanine Pirro is the victim of a smear campaign. Commentators framed Jasmine's revelations as manipulation, branding her a radical exploding tragedy for fame. Headlines blared across right-wing outlets. Pirro ambushed in Congress. Crockett's witch hunt. The contrast was jarring, one half of America cheering Jasmine as a warrior for justice, the other painting her as a threat to the republic itself. Social media split down the middle. Hashtags trended side by side, colliding in digital war. Hashtag justice for Eric surging alongside hashtag stand with Pirro. Threads erupted in rage, videos of Jasmine's thunderous speech battling clips of Pirro's red-faced denials, each shared millions of times. Families of victims rallied behind Jasmine, their grief transforming into defiance, while gun lobby groups mobilized overnight, pledging millions to defend Pirro's honor. Even within the chamber, lines hardened. Jim Jordan gave a defiant press statement, his finger jabbing at reporters. This was a stunt, a disgrace, and we will not let the radical left destroy Jeanine Pirro. But in the same breath, progressive lawmakers raised their fists beside Jasmine, vowing hearings, subpoenas, and reforms. The nation had split wide open. What began as a hearing over one young man's tragic death had become something larger, a war of narratives, a fight for the soul of justice itself. And as cameras cut back to Jasmine Crockett's face, calm, resolute, unshaken, the question was no longer whether she had won the moment, but whether she could survive the firestorm had unleashed. By dawn, the battlefield had shifted from the marble halls of Congress to the glowing screens of America. Social media detonated like dynamite, timelines flooded with clips, memes, and hashtags that refused to die. The most viral image, Jeanine Pirro frozen for 47 agonizing seconds, her mouth half open, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. Above it, captions screamed, 47 seconds of silence. Justice spoke louder. Within hours, the clip had been viewed tens of millions of times. But it wasn't just Pirro's silence that dominated feeds. A second image surged even faster. Jasmine Crockett, finger pointed like a general leading an army, her words emblazoned in bold text. The gun lobby paid you in dollars. Eric paid with his blood. That line spread like wildfire, plastered across memes, TikToks, and protest posters. Teens remixed it into songs, Comedians mimic Pirro's frozen face. Activists carried banners with Jasmine's silhouette blazing against Capitol steps. Jasmine began trending under a new name, the People's Prosecutor. To her supporters, she wasn't just a congresswoman anymore, she was a symbol, a shield for every mother who buried a child, a sword against corruption cloaked in power. The emotional tide swung hard, from grief and fury to a strange kind of empowerment. People laughed at Pirro's meltdown. They mocked her excuses, and in that laughter they found strength. That the war was not without fire. Conservative accounts fought back, launching hashtags like #StandWithPirro and #CrockettClownShow, flooding feeds with edited clips that twisted Jasmine's words. Troll farms churned out memes of their own, portraying her as unhinged, a radical out for blood. The internet became a battlefield, one side roaring with humor and solidarity, the other clinging to rage and denial. News anchors fanned the flames, replaying the viral clips on loop. CNN called it the 47 seconds that broke a career. Fox dismissed it as a cheat shot edited for clicks. MSNBC framed Jasmine as the voice of a generation silenced by bullets. And through it all, Jasmine said nothing on social media, letting the storm grow, her silence deliberate, her power magnified by restraint. As night fell, one truth was undeniable. Pirro had become a meme, Jasmine had become a movement, and America was laughing, crying, and fighting all at once. The question now wasn't whether Jasmine had won Twitter, it was how long before the digital war spilled back into the halls of power. As America laughed and raged online, the storm crashed back into the chamber with a force no one could ignore. Reporters' phones buzzed in unison, their faces paling as they glanced at their screens. Then the whispers started, swelling into a wave. Leaked emails, Doge, Pirro. Within seconds, every camera in the room pivoted toward Jeanine Pirro just as the first headline blared across the networks. Emails show Pirro pressured prosecutors to shield gun lobbyists. The evidence splashed onto screens inside the chamber, lines of text pulled from Pirro's own correspondence. One email read, "These cases can't go forward. Too many donors tied up in this. Shut it down." Another, colder, "We can't alienate the lobby that funds us. Priorities must be clear." Gasps tore through the audience like a lightning strike. Some clutched their mouths, others shouted in fury, and the entire chamber shook under the weight of betrayal. Pirro's face drained of color, her hands trembling as she fumbled with papers, stammering, "These are fake. Fabricated. You can't prove." But her voice cracked, the desperation dripping through every syllable. Jasmine Crockett rose again, her voice like a blade against the silence. "So it wasn't enough to laugh with them at Gayless. You buried cases, you protected the very people arming the killers on our streets. While Eric's mother buried her son, you buried the truth." The chamber erupted, progressive lawmakers pounded their desks, families of victims shouted resign, resign, while Pirro's allies shouted back, their voices drowned in the chaos. The gavel slammed again and again, useless against the fury. Pirro tried to shout over it all, her words tumbling out in a frenzy. "This is political warfare. This is a setup. You think you can destroy me with lies." But even as she screamed, the leaked emails glowed on the giant screen behind her. Undeniable, damning, inescapable. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She simply pointed at the screen and said, "America doesn't need me to destroy you. Jouch, you destroy yourself." The gallery exploded in applause so loud it rattled the chandeliers above. Outside, the chants of justice for Eric merged with a new cry, "Resign, resign." The Capitol shook with the sound of a nation demanding accountability. Pirro sank back into her chair, her face pale, her eyes wild, a cornered figure watching her empire crumble. The camera zoomed in, capturing the sweat, the twitch of her lips, the unraveling of a woman who had once commanded fear. Now the question burned hotter than ever, both in the chamber and across the nation. Will Jeanine Pirro be forced to resign, or will she strike back harder than anyone expects? The leaked emails still glowed across the chamber screens when Jeanine Pirro shot to her feet, her chair screeching against the floor like a warning siren. Her face was crimson, her fists clenched, and her voice tore through the uproar like a whip. "You've smeared me with lies, I won't stand for it." The chamber fell into a shocked hush, all eyes turning as Pirro leaned forward, her body trembling with rage. "This is character assassination. This is a witch hunt, and every person cheering her on is complicit in the destruction of truth." Jasmine Crockett stood slowly, unhurried, her gaze steady and merciless. The contrast was electric. Pirro raging, Jasmine composed, the tension between them pulling the chamber taut like a bowstring ready to snap. Jasmine's voice was calm but thunderous in its conviction. "It's not lies, Judge Pirro, it's evidence, and America sees it now." The words struck like a hammer, and the crowd roared back, half in applause, half in fury. Pirro slammed her palm on the desk, her voice cracking as she screamed, "You twisted my words, you paraded doctor emails, you turned this chamber into a courtroom of lies." She gestured wildly toward Jasmine, her desperation laid bare. "This woman is dangerous. She doesn't want justice, she wants to burn this system to the ground." But Jasmine stepped closer, her figure illuminated by the glaring lights and the glowing damning emails still behind Pirro. "No, Judge," she said, her tone dropping into a lethal calm. "The only thing burning is the mask you wore. For years, you stood as the face of law and order. But the evidence shows you were lawless, and your order was bought and paid for." The chamber erupted, the sound surging like a wave crashing against stone, reporters shouting into cameras, families of victims rising to their feet. Pirro tried to rally, her voice straining. "This is still America. We don't convict people with soundbites and slander." But Jasmine struck again, cutting her off mid-sentence. "No, we convict with truth. And every second you spend screaming instead of answering these charges tells America exactly what they need to know." The gavel slammed desperately, but it could not suppress the storm. Pirro's words tumbled into the nose, drowned beneath chants that had returned with fresh force. "Justice for Eric. Resign, resign." Outside, the protesters' cries merged with the chaos within, shaking the chamber to its core. The camera zoomed tighter, catching Pirro's eyes wild, frantic, cornered, then cutting back to Jasmine, steady as iron, unflinching. The duel was no longer just words, it was survival, power, truth, and lies colliding in real time. The adrenaline surged through every viewer, every heartbeat sensed to the rhythm of the showdown. And as the chamber teetered on the edge of collapse, one question echoed across the nation. Could Pirro claw her way back, or had Jasmine just sealed her fate forever? The chamber still shook from the duel when Jasmine Crockett raised her hand, commanding silence with nothing but presence. She lifted a small device, her voice steady but laced with sorrow. "If my words are not enough, then let America hear the voices you've ignored." Judge Pirro, she pressed play, and the chamber filled with sound, not rhetoric, not statistics, but raw human pain. A mother's trembling voice broke through first. "My little Beau was only 12. He was walking home from school when a stray bullet hit his chest. I begged for stricter laws, but no one listened. Now I sleep beside his empty bed." The room froze, the words slicing deeper than any debate. Gasps echoed, tears streaked down faces in the gallery, and even hardened lawmakers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Pirro shot up, waving her hands, her voice shrill. "This is manipulation. This chamber isn't a therapy session." But before she could finish, the next recording played, a father's voice, heavy and broken. "My daughter was 17. She had a scholarship, a future, everything ahead of her. And then she was gone. I begged officials to stop the guns. They turned their backs." The sound of his sobs drowned out Pirro's protests, his grief heavier than her fury. Jasmine didn't look at Pirro, she stood facing the chamber, her expression carved from stone, as the third recording played. A young girl's trembling voice whispered, "I miss my brother. He used to help me with homework, now he's in heaven. Please, stop the guns." The chamber broke. Mothers clutched their children tighter, lawmakers wiped their eyes, and the chants outside grew louder, merging with the cries inside, until it felt like the building itself was weeping. Pirro tried once more to shout, her voice cracking, "You can't, this is emotional blackmail." But her words drowned beneath the avalanche of grief. The recordings were louder, raw, unstoppable. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, many in tears, unable to look away. Hashtags exploded anew. Hashtag voices for justice. Hashtag enough is enough. As the final recording faded, Jasmine turned slowly, her eyes sweeping the chamber. "These are the voices you silenced with your politics. They don't need your excuses. They need justice." The chamber trembled, not from shouting, but from the silence of those stunned into awe. And across America, millions wiped their eyes, knowing something irreversible had just shifted. The chamber still echoed with the last trembling voice of a child when Jeanine Pirro finally broke. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the desk, her once commanding voice reduced to a fractured whisper. This isn't fair, the words slipped out, fragile and defeated, hanging in the air like the surrender of a fallen soldier. Reporters froze, their pens pausing mid-scratch, the cameras zooming in to capture the crack in her armor that the world had waited to see. The gallery erupted not with cheers, not with boos, but with a stunned silence that cut deeper than nose. For a woman who had built her career on rage and dominance, her collapse was more shocking than any explosion. Her eyes glistened with tears she fought to suppress, her breath uneven, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of years of lies had finally crushed her. Jasmine Crockett stepped forward, her voice steady, unwavering, carrying the strength of every grieving family in the room. Justice isn't supposed to be fair to the guilty. It's supposed to protect the innocent. The words rang like a verdict, final and absolute, slicing through Pirro's collapse and engraving themselves into the chamber walls. Gasps, then applause, then thunderous chants roared back to life. Justice for Eric! Justice for Eric! The chamber shook with the sound, the gavel pounding in vain, reporters shouting into cameras as history unfolded before their eyes. Pirro sank back into her chair, eyes vacant, lips trembling, her reign crumbling in real time. The camera cut to Jasmine, standing tall, unflinching, her silhouette glowing against the storm. Across the nation, millions leaned closer, pulses racing, knowing they had just witnessed the unthinkable, the fall of Jeanine Pirro. The one question lingered, louder than the chants, heavier than the silence. Is this the end of Jeanine Pirro or just the beginning of a bigger war? The chamber still vibrated with chants of justice for Eric. When Jeanine Pirro staggered from her chair, her once defiant stride reduced to a shaky retreat. Cameras followed her every step as she pushed through the side doors, her face pale, her voice swallowed by the roar of the crowd. Outside, Fox commentators scrambled live on air, their voices cracking as they tried to spin the implosion. This was, taken out of context, Judge Pirro was ambushed. But even their rehearsed defenses sounded hollow, drowned beneath the tidal wave of outrage. By morning, headlines blazed across the nation. Crockett speaks for the silenced. Pirro crumbles in 47 seconds. Justice for Eric becomes justice for a generation. Images of Jasmine pointing her finger like a general, standing beside Eric's grieving mother, flooded front pages and feeds. She was no longer just a congresswoman, she was the face of defiance, a warrior who had stared down corruption and refused to blink. Public opinion shifted with seismic force. Polls showed overwhelming support for juvenile justice reform, with hashtags like #enough is enough and #Crockett for justice dominating every platform. In cities across America, candlelight vigils transformed into rallies, voices once drowned in grief now rising in unity. Youth activists marched shoulder to shoulder with parents, chanting Jasmine's words, "Justice isn't supposed to be fair to the guilty, it's supposed to protect the innocent." Pirro hid from the cameras, her empire fractured, her allies scrambling to distance themselves. But Jasmine Crockett stood taller than ever, a symbol etched into the conscience of a nation at war with itself. The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned. The chaos of the chamber faded into silence as night fell on Washington. Beneath the soft glow of street lamps, a small memorial had formed at the Capitol steps, candles flickering in the wind, flowers scattered across the stone, photographs of Eric Jackham smiling in frames that could no longer hold his future. Jasmine Crockett walked slowly toward the site, her steps heavy but resolute, Eric's mother Tamara at her side. Together they carried white lilac, their stems trembling in Tamara's hands. They knelt before the candles, Jasmine helping Tamara place the flowers gently atop the growing mound. For a long moment, neither spoke, the only sound the whisper of flames and the murmur of protesters still gather in the distance. Terror streaked Tamara's face, she whispered, he believed in this place, in serving people. He thought he could change things. Her voice cracked, but Jasmine's hand clasped hers, strong and steady. A voiceover cut through the silence, deep and resonant. A warrior for justice isn't measured by the enemies she defeats, but the lives she defends. The words lingered as the camera lingered on Jasmine's face, eyes glistening with sorrow, jaw set with determination. For all the fire she had unleashed in the chamber, here she was simply human, mourning a young life stolen and vowing it would not be in vain. The crowd at the memorial swelled, candles raised high, their light reflecting in Jasmine's eyes. She stood and turned, facing them not as a politician, but as one of them. Her voice was soft but carried with weight. Eric's story cannot end here. It must become the beginning of something greater, a future where no mother buries a child because we were too afraid to act. The crowd erupted in applause, some weeping openly, others chanting her name in unison. Jasmine clasped Tamara's hand once more, lifting it gently, as if to remind the world that this fight was not about her, but about every family broken by bullets. In that moment, sorrow and hope intertwined. Grief transformed into purpose, and Jasmine Crockett became more than a lawmaker. She became a promise. The camera pulled in close, the glow of candlelight still flickering behind her, faces of protesters illuminated like a sea of defiance. Jasmine Crockett stood tall, her posture unshaken, but her eyes carried the heaviness of grief and the fire of conviction. The nation had seen her battle in the chamber, had witnessed her clash with Pirro, but now, in this final moment, she wasn't addressing judges or lawmakers, she was addressing America. Her voice came low at first, steady and deliberate, each word chosen like an oath. The question isn't whether we'll bury more Erics, the question is, will we finally fight for a country where they can live? The words hung in the air, reverberating through the silence that followed. No shouting now, no chaos, just a raw truth pressing against the hearts of millions watching from living rooms, phones, and screens across the world. The broadcast cut to images as her words continued. Tamara Jackham sobbing into her folded hands, students marching with signs that read "We are Eric," parents lighting candles at vigils in cities coast to coast. The voiceover carried through it all, Jasmine's tone resolute. We've buried too many futures stolen, too many dreams silenced. Justice cannot be delayed any longer. Because justice delay is not just denied, it is destroyed. The camera cut back to Jasmine, her face lit against the dark, eyes locked on the lens as if she could look into every home at once. This fight is bigger than me, bigger than this chamber. It belongs to every mother, every father, every child who deserves to live without fear of bullets in their classrooms or on their streets. If fighting for them makes me a disgrace, then I will wear that disgrace proudly. The final image linger. Jasmine raising Eric's photo high, the crowd behind her lifting their candles in unison, a nation's grief merging with its resolve. The sound of chants swelled one last time. Justice for Eric. Justice for Eric, before the screen slowly faded to black. A single line appeared in white against the darkness. #Justice for Eric. Then, the final hook question cut through the silence, daring every viewer to face it. What would you do to stop the next Eric from being lost? Justice is never automatic. It lives and breathes through the courage of ordinary people who refuse to look away. Eric's life was stolen, but his dream of a safer, fairer America does not have to die with him. When leaders fail, it is our voices, united, that become unstoppable. Change begins not in the halls of power, but in the choices we make every day to speak, to act, to fight for those silenced. So I ask you, what bold step will you take today to ensure the next Eric lives to see his future? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.